So good afternoon and welcome to Praxis Peace Institute's Planetary Pause series. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis Peace Institute. And today we are very fortunate to have with us Kim Coontz and HILARY ABELL, who are both experts and longtime advocates and workers within the cooperative sector in our country. So the theme today is beyond the mainstream media radar: cooperative startups and conversions in the US. So we are inspired by the way worker-owned cooperatives are growing in the US, a movement that we hear, unfortunately, little to nothing about in our media. So our speakers today have been at the forefront of worker-owned cooperatives in California and the US for many years. They're going to give short presentations about their work and organizations, which will be followed by Q&A and from the audience as well as from me first. So up first is going to be Kim Coontz, who is the executive director of the California Center for Cooperative Development in Davis, California. For more than 14 years, Kim worked for the Center for Cooperatives at the University of California, Davis, and was executive director of YOLO Mutual Housing Association for 4 years. Her experience includes assisting groups in the startup of cooperatives, teaching cooperative board governance seminars, providing technical assistance to cooperatives, conducting research, writing, and endeavoring to find new ways to grow and strengthen the cooperative business model. Her publications include Cooperative Startup Manuals, Steps to Starting a Marketing Cooperative, and Steps to Starting a Worker Cooperative, and a book on childcare cooperatives, something we could use a lot more of, called Bringing Families Together, A Guide to Parent Cooperatives. And I'm going to give the background for HILARY ABELL first, even though Kim will go first. I'm going to ask everyone except Kim, HILARY, and John and myself to please mute yourselves. So HILARY ABELL is co-founder of Project Equity, a nonprofit that builds economic resiliency in low-income communities by demonstrating and replicating strategies that increase worker ownership. Project Equity works with small business clients in the Bay Area and in other regions around the country. Her focus is on employee ownership transitions and in raising awareness and building the ecosystem of support for this powerful business model nationwide. Formerly, she was the executive director of Wages, which is a worker-owned cleaning cooperative in Oakland, California. So welcome, both HILARY and Kim. It's great to have you both with us today. And I'm going to ask you, Kim, to go first. And I know you have a slide presentation. Do you want to begin with that, or do you have anything you want to say before that?
Yeah, I'll begin with that and hope I get the right screen here. Had things set up and now I am not.
Well, I have to share. I just did.
Oh, no, you are sharing your screen.
Okay, I've got to go back and do what John instructed me to do.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I don't think you need to do a thing. I think.
Yeah, it's just one person at a time right now. Like as long as we rotate, fine, it'll be.
Okay, so she can do it, right?
Yes.
Great.
You've got the both.
There they are.
Yeah, there you go.
So hopefully you're seeing the right screen. And one of the things I did want to start with just giving a little shout out. HILARY and I have been spending quite a bit of time together, along with Ricardo Nunez with the Sustainable Economies Law Center. We, within the coming week or two, will have a report out on the landscape of cooperatives in California focused on worker, housing, and childcare. So we're happy that it's just about over, but we've enjoyed working on it together. At least I've enjoyed it. So I just want to start with just some graphics. I'm not going to discuss them. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. So just as a backdrop to the focus of just kind of introducing worker co-ops a little bit and putting context to this really brief presentation. You know, we all know there's this widening gap between the rich and the rest of us. That's not a colorblind condition. You know, there are Black and brown people have felt the weight of this gap much more than whites. And you could think, well, it's because people are lazy, and actually productivity scales and research has shown that it's really not that we're lazy. But despite the increased productivity in workers, the benefits of that productivity has not accrued to workers, rather it's gone to corporate profits. So a lot of effort, usually the most traditional reaction to this situation is to try to get people jobs or better jobs. And the traditional focus is on sort of job training, which is to give people skills, and they would be in industries that are kind of looked at as being up and coming, like solar, construction, that kind of thing. Another strategy is to help people by teaching them job search skills, or assisting them in finding jobs, giving them the skills of where to look for jobs. That's another traditional strategy. Another one is that I'm just calling etiquette education, which would be, how to dress for a job, how to act in a job interview, maybe how to help put together your resume, all those kinds of things that are helpful when you're searching for work. And there's nothing wrong with these, but except that the bottom line is that all of these systems are going to land a person back into the system that creates it, has the circumstance of inequality. So is there really any change that those can offer? Certainly, I'm not arguing that they wouldn't provoke change, but I think we have an alternative that is more systemic, and that is worker co-ops. Worker co-ops can address inequality because the workplace is designed to where the workers are making all of the decisions about how work is organized, how pay is distributed, how money will be spent. Those are all in the hands of the people that own the building, own the business. So it gives them opportunity for this co-ownership. And of course, it creates a job in the process of being a business owner. All those decisions about work are made democratically on the basis of one worker, one vote, not on shares owned. And this is true empowerment. Empowerment happens when you put people in charge of their lives. And what we find with all these kinds of programs that really stimulate true empowerment is that empowerment doesn't stay in the workplace. It happens outside of the workplace. And when people feel empowered in work, they see that they can be empowered to participate in their child's school by voting, all those kinds of things. So I want to talk a little bit now about just an overview of the structure of worker co-ops. You probably are all familiar with it, but just so we're kind of all on the same page, is that in a worker co-op, the worker members own the business through a cooperative corporation. Each member has one share in the cooperative, which is usually purchased. It's usually a low rate and relatively stays the same over time. It doesn't fluctuate with the value of the business. And each person has one vote. Each share, everybody equally shares all of the risks and all the benefits of that business. And they're usually paid either a wage or salary. And then on top of that, all the year-end profits are equitably divided among the members. And usually the method for dividing that is what we call patronage, which is based on your use of the cooperative. Probably the predominant way this happens in a worker co-op is by the hours worked, but it could also be on wages earned or some other way of measuring use of the cooperative. So I want to just kind of turn now to a method that we use. This is just an example. We help people start cooperatives using all different kinds of methods. But one development model in our toolbox that we use, particularly for marginalized communities. The reason that it's a particularly good, what we call the build and recruit model, is good for marginalized groups is that usually people that have been marginalized, disempowered during their lives, they don't see themselves as potential owners of a business. The other thing is that starting a worker co-op is a very, very time consuming and process. And a lot of times people that are marginalized don't have a lot of control over their time, the ability to, if they're working, they're in jobs where they get their schedule the night before for the week. And so they can't schedule a meeting in advance. Childcare can be an issue, just issues of life. They affect all of us, but when you don't have a lot of money or a lot of control over your life circumstances, that becomes more difficult. So what we do in using this build and recruit model is that we completely create the business. So we select what the business will be. We do all of the kind of groundwork for that business, and then we recruit people into the business. We recruit the members. So there's a role of the nonprofit. We actually become a member of this co-op with our only voting rights are if the business decided to demutualize. So, but we have done all the business planning, we prepared everything for the business, and then we help them problem solve issues. We use a community volunteers in this process, in the early process. Community volunteers are actually the initial board of directors. This gives the new business kind of these ties to the community, and it also gives those ties that these community volunteers have, those connections to the members, and that can be very, very useful in a new business. They become sort of the really big advocates for this new business that is started. So I want to just really briefly share a couple of examples that we've used using this build and recruit model. Our most recent green cleaning co-op is called Yellow Eco Clean Cooperative. These are some of the members. It started with 3 members, and it's grown to 18 members now, and they're trying to recruit now and not able to. It's really difficult for them to recruit, just like it's difficult to get any new members of the cooperative. And what we started with this business is we started by doing a feasibility study. What's the competition in the area? We did a business plan. What will be the projected needs to break even, to form a profit, to create a profit, those kinds of things. We incorporated, we created the bylaws, and then we recruited people in. And what we do in this model is built into the bylaws is an exit of the community volunteers as the new members complete their candidacy period. So, and we also begin immediately placing these new members of the business in the role of making decisions. So they're training in the systems of cleaning homes and businesses, but they're also making decisions about what will the policies be in terms of hours? What will the hours of the business be? What will the pay of people be, given that we have this much projected income at this break-even analysis? We teach them how to read and understand financial statements, all those kinds of things to make the business successful. And it has been successful. They had quite a few bumps during COVID, but I'm so sorry, I thought I muted this. Anyway, so they are doing really well, but we were able to help them. They got a PPP during COVID crisis. We were able to get them help them get to equipment that they needed to work safely. Another example is one we're just launching right now, which is Co-op Home Care, and both of these businesses have websites and that you can delve into. And Co-op Home Care, also lots of challenges with launching this one, because we were actually ready to open the doors about a year and a half ago, right when COVID hit. So we've had a lot of bumps here, but they provide home support services for elderly and disabled. And so they also are joining with, can't seem to get the last picture up there, but they're joining with a network of Co-op Home Care businesses, co-ops across the United States that's organized through the Cooperative Development Foundation. So that's basically all I was gonna, my sharing at this point. So I'll stop sharing right now and let Hillary take over the reins.
Great, thank you so much, Kim. I will hold questions until after Hillary does her presentation. So Hillary,
Wonderful.
Yeah. Did you want to share a screen too? Did you want to?
I will.
All
Yes,
right.
I will. Let me get the right thing showing on my screen before I share it so that I don't get you lost in my myriad of documents.
Right. Oh, I know how
Um,
that can be.
Yes.
Hillary's
Okay,
sitting
there we go.
outside in Guerneville.
Yeah, enjoying the last of the not the last, but the late,
Still summer. No, it
late
isn't
fall.
still summer. That's right. It's fall now.
Yeah, enjoying the fall weather, I should say.
Mhm.
Okay, great. So I will just share the screen and it'll take a second for it to go into full screen view.
Okay.
There it is. So first of all, Georgia, thank you for having me, and Kim, it has been a pleasure working on that publication together over a good part of the last 2 years. And so it's really fun to be doing this presentation together. And thank you everybody for being here this afternoon.
You lost your picture. You lost your share.
Yes, it seems to be paused. Let me try again.
So what's happening is if the connection is faulty, it might pause the sharing.
You might have to
Okay.
go indoors, Hillary.
Or
I will do that if I need to. Is
Oh,
that
here it
showing
is.
now?
We
Okay.
got it.
Yeah, it tends to take a minute to come up to the sharing, to the presentation view. So in any case, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Georgia, for putting on this conversation about worker cooperatives. I think I have been in this work for a long time, but not as long as Kim. But I was a member of a worker cooperative myself for about 5 years back in the 1990s. So coming up on almost 30 years ago, was involved in other things for some time and have been working directly in the Bay Area and beyond with worker cooperatives since 2003. So this is a love of mine, and it surely isn't a fantastic time to be having this conversation because the zeitgeist has really shifted. You know, I think since the Great Recession, there's been a lot more interest in alternative economic models, and I feel that interest growing every day. So really glad to have the chance to talk with you about it. Georgia, your introduction of me and Project Equity was wonderful. It was really a good description of what we do. I'll just give a bit more of introductory words about myself, and then I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of worker co-ops and employee ownership. And Kim did a wonderful job of presenting the issues that things like worker cooperatives are so desperately needed to address. So I won't repeat that, but I will touch a bit more on some of the benefits. And then I'll talk about transitioning successful businesses to worker co-ops, which is where, as Georgia said, our organization Project Equity has been focusing since 2015. So yes, I mentioned I was a worker owner at a co-op called Equal Exchange. As Georgia said, I did run another nonprofit that developed worker co-ops from the ground up using a model not dissimilar from the one Kim just described, actually, for 8 years. And during that time, one of the most fulfilling aspects of that work for me was that we measured the impact of the work very rigorously. For reasons that are quite unique, we actually had a lot of access. We knew the women in the cooperatives very well. They were green cleaning cooperatives also. And we also were able to work with them to really understand their family finances in a real way using tax returns. So we knew that their family incomes were increasing dramatically. In the first year we measured that increase, it was 40% increase in family incomes. So I don't know how many of us may have had a 40% increase in your family income in a year or two. It's very not a common experience. And of course it was game changing for these women because they're quite low income immigrant women from Mexico and Central America. The last year we measured it was 80% increase in family income, and the individual income of the women was doubling and tripling, so that they were becoming the primary breadwinners in their family and really advancing the well-being of everyone in their family. So that was a really foundational learning for me, and that was really what made me want to go on and do more work like that, but with new approaches. So that those types of benefits could be made available to more low-wage workers across the US. So that's really the mission of Project Equity, is to help make these models, worker cooperatives and other forms of broad-based employee ownership, more impactful in our economy in the United States and more accessible to folks of color and to low and middle wage workers around the country. And we've been at it officially for 7.5 years. Just very briefly, as I mentioned, we do work primarily with worker cooperatives, and that's really where my background is strongest. And the companies that we have transitioned so far have all become worker cooperatives. We have expanded our scope of work, though, to include other kinds of broad-based employee ownership, which I won't talk very much about, but companies with employee stock ownership plans, like those of you who live in certain parts of the Bay Area may have Recology as your they don't like the term waste management. Resource recovery, I think might be their term, but who picks up your garbage and recycling and compost. They are 100% employee owned through an ESOP, and they're quite a remarkable company. And many larger businesses that look at transitioning to employee ownership do consider ESOPs very seriously because of the substantial tax advantages. And there's a newer model called employee ownership trust that I won't spend time on today. To speak about the benefits, I just want to emphasize two things. One is that broad-based employee ownership, like worker cooperatives, creates and sustains quality jobs and also makes the businesses stronger. And there's a link here to a publication on our, it's not a link, but you could go to this link to find the case for employee ownership if you're really interested in the documented benefits of all forms of broad-based employee ownership. It's quite remarkable. We do a lot of work reaching out to business owners. That's a big part of our effort, because most business owners don't know about worker cooperatives or employee ownership, and most of them actually don't have succession plans either. And they don't know that employee ownership makes their companies stronger and more resilient. And we really saw that during COVID. It's also a great way to retain and attract and reward employees. And as Kim alluded to, we all know that that's really hard for businesses these days. So as I said earlier, this is a great time for business owners to be considering worker cooperatives and employee ownership. These are just a couple of the statistics I found about how worker cooperatives, on the one hand, that stat on the left is a stat from a study of worker cooperatives in the US, comparing them to profitability in other industries. And it's, noticeably higher in a meaningful way. And the study on the right is from an ESOP study that was a much larger study and an academic study, but that showed that ESOPs grow more than 2% faster per year than their competitors in the same industry. So this is, kind of hard data. There's quite a bit of academic research into ESOPs. And while co-ops, you can't necessarily say that it's a given that co-ops have the same impact. What we find is that the through line is true for both models. This is a data point that I really like to share because it's recent. It's about a year old now. It's from COVID times. We all know what a crisis the pandemic and the closures of our economy, what a crisis that was for small businesses. And immediately when the shutdown started happening, I reached out to some folks who were in the academic side of the ESOP world and said, are you going to be studying this during COVID? Because I knew that in prior recessions, there was a lot of data showing over multiple recessions that employee-owned companies had retained jobs and survived better than other companies. And sure enough, he said, yep, we're on it, we're studying it. And about 8 months later, the study came out and it showed that they retained jobs at a 4-to-1 rate during the pandemic. So this is really real. And this is part of why I'm so passionate about different kinds of employee ownership. So a quick story, there is a company called California Solar Electric, and it is a solar design and installation company up in Grass Valley. And we first met them in 2015, and we actually started working with them on a co-op transition late that year. And a couple of years later, or about a year and a half later, they were kind of making their way through the process. The process can take, a few years, sometimes as little as a year. And they were growing so quickly and really needed to get their financial systems in place and to just work on some other things. So they paused their transition. And then they came back to us about a year and a half later, and they completed their transition to a worker co-op in 2019. When we first met them, they had 15 employees. When they completed their transition, I think it was about 25 or 30. Then came COVID shortly after that, of course. And this is one of the worker owners at the cooperative, basically describing that the impact of COVID on their company, he called it a hiccup, whereas it was just incredibly disruptive and actually took a lot of small businesses down, sadly. And they credit employee ownership with that. They credit being a cooperative with how well they came through COVID. And just to give a specific example, they did have to furlough employees for, I think, a short period of time. And they managed to do that in a way that was that people, could manage it and were able to come back fairly quickly, and they were able to access a PPP loan. But one of the things that some of the employees did, including Chuck, while they were on furlough, was to work on a whole new line of business. So they came up with this idea of installing battery storage systems to store solar power, and the sort of the storage systems, and then selling the batteries. And this was not something they'd done before. And thanks to that new business line, they actually hit their 2020 sales goals, and just knocked it out of the park, and ended up increasing wages last year by 20%. So we are so proud of them. And that is really why, sort of like the women that I used to work with in the cleaning co-ops, that's the relationships and the personal empowerment are very important to me and very inspiring. But knowing data wise that like people's economic realities are really improving is the part that really keeps me going. There is a video on our website, and I'll put the link in the chat if you want to watch just a 4-minute video where the guy who sold the company to his employees and is now a worker owner and the general manager of the company, Lars Ortegren, talks a little bit about that experience. And some of the worker owners talk about what it's meant to them to become a cooperative. How am I doing on time, Georgia?
How much more time do you want?
5-6 minutes?
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I'll just tell you a couple other stories. Part of the reason why we focus on transitioning existing businesses to worker co-ops is that, as I mentioned before, most business owners don't have a succession plan. And we are in the midst, right in the middle of what's known as the silver tsunami, with baby boomers retiring in high numbers every day, 10,000 a day. And boomers are a very entrepreneurial generation. They own a lot of businesses. In California, it's almost 4 million businesses. And most businesses, when they get put up for sale, they don't sell. Most business owners don't have a successor in the family. So even if it's a really strong company, many, many businesses are closing. So I think we all know intuitively and from our own experience how precious locally owned independent businesses are to our communities. And the ones that have been around for decades actually have very high benefits in terms of job creation and retention. So these folks, I'll tell you one more story. Tom and George are 2 wonderful guys who have a glass blowing factory in West Berkeley. They met when they were working together at a different business, started a company called Adams and Chittenden Scientific Glass 20 years ago, and have built it up into a really successful small manufacturing company in West Berkeley. So it's local manufacturing. It's very unique. They do custom jobs for scientific labs all over the world. And they didn't think that anyone was going to buy them. And when they thought, well, maybe that company out in New Jersey might be interested in our unique kind of custom niche that we have, but they would probably just, move the company, take our clients, and stop doing the high quality, innovative work that they do. If you have a lab that wants to do a scientific experiment and needs a special kind of glass object, they can make anything. So that's what they do. They heard about Project Equity on the radio and came and met with us. We worked with them to do a transition of their company to a worker co-op. It has, I think, 9 worker owners now. And Tom on the left, I think, is in the process of exiting the business, and George will stick around another couple of years. So it's also retaining local manufacturing. So we all, I imagine, patronize independent businesses around us. And so I like to tell people what we've learned about what makes a company a good fit for a worker co-op transition. As Kim said, the real value proposition here is to help workers own companies that are profitable and can improve their lives economically as well as in terms of workplace environment and all of that, and having a voice and control of the business. So we always look for companies that are profitable. COVID, of course, we take into account the past experience of the past year and a half. And we found that 10 or more employees usually is a better fit for a company. If you have fewer than that, it can be more fragile. And if the owner leaves, then you often have a lot of gaps in terms of things that need to be done. So there are cases where it works, but we focus on companies between 10 and about 200 employees. I won't spend too much time on this because it gets a little technical, but you might be wondering, how does this process happen? So just real quickly, the business is sold either through a stock sale or an asset sale, and usually it's financed with debt. And we have two partnerships with financing organizations. One is a community development financial institution, another is a B corporation. And so we can, through those partnerships, bring loans into the transaction to help the worker co-op that gets formed to buy the business from the selling owner. And it's a four-step process, the way that we do it. Exploration is where my colleagues just talk to any business owner who calls us up. We do free consultations. Then, about 1 in 10 will decide to do a feasibility study with us. And that's like a 3 or 4 month process. We make sure the business is sound financially. We help educate the employees. We're working mostly with the owner at that point. But when the owner decides to move forward, then we create a team. They come into our transition program, and it's a team of employees working together with the owner to decide how to structure the cooperative and the kinds of steps that, Kim's organization will take the founders through to establish the co-op. We'll take that transition team to design their co-op. And then we do work with the businesses for 2 years afterwards. So that's where we really get into skill building and helping worker owners be good board members and really making sure there's an engaged membership, healthy governance, and understanding of the financials. I'll go into that. Yeah, so that's it. Just wanted to give that overview of of why we do what we do and a little bit about how these transition processes work.
This is so exciting. I so appreciate both of you, Hilary and Kim, for giving us this information today, a lot of which I didn't know. It's like I know more about Mondragon than I know about a lot of the local transitions that have happened. And a couple of questions I want to put out there to both of you, or either one can answer or both of you can. Maybe it would be a good idea to explain to our audience the difference between a worker-owned cooperative and an ESOP.
Yeah, I can take that one, Kim. That's a question I get a lot. So what they have in common is that any employee of the company that meets certain basic criteria, I like to use the term basic criteria. It's usually having been there for a certain amount of time, being a worker in good standing, you kind of pass the test, you're going to be sticking around. So anyone who meets basic criteria, it can become an employee owner or a worker owner. In an ESOP, that process happens through really a gift of stock from the company to the employee owner. And the stock is not held directly, it's held in a retirement trust. So ESOPs are really retirement plans. And the profit sharing, and they're also valued on the open market, which most worker cooperatives are not. And they don't necessarily, and usually don't, almost never have democratic governance and rarely have employees on the board. So that's really the biggest difference. Worker co-ops are democratically governed by definition. The worker owners either as a whole make up the board if it's a board of the whole where every member is on the board, or they elect the board of directors if they have a representative model. So that's a pretty fundamental difference. But in terms of if you're looking at kind of wealth building opportunities and sharing ownership, there's some good commonalities as well. But yeah, they're fairly different animals if you're really focusing in on drilling down to the elements of what makes a co-op a co-op.
Right. I know a lot of people think an ESOP is a worker-owned business, and it's not quite the same thing. And it's not a one worker, one vote, one share. It's not that type of thing. It's not the Mondragon model or the models that you're talking about primarily.
It's not. Yeah.
So most of the transitions you're working on are actually going toward worker-owned, not ESOPs, right?
Yeah, all of the ones we've done so far have been worker cooperatives. And we have made a point of finding partners in the ESOP world that have the same interests that we have in supporting low and middle wage workers in gaining ownership in their companies. ESOPs are very technical, so we don't do the technical side, but we are partnering with others to do some ESOP work. Because we do think that there are a lot of businesses out there that could be owned by employees that would not end up being worker co-ops. So we're kind of dabbling and getting ready to be hopefully more active with the ESOP model, because it does work for a lot of larger companies. And over time, to help introduce democratic management, or democratic, I should say, governance into ESOPs, because it is possible. There are some that do it. And in the long run, that's what we'd like to see more of. We think of that as the gold standard, 100% employee-owned ESOP with democratic governance.
Yes, that would be good. Now, another thing that you mentioned, I think, and maybe both of you did, about the boomer phenomenon, that now they don't have a succession plan very often because no one in the family wants the business, things like that. And also, though, with the boomer generation, one thing that's going to be really needed a lot are the co-op home care possibilities. So I'm wondering, is this a movement that's growing here? I know it's a national movement. Some of the people involved on the East Coast and even on the West Coast have been on our Mondragon trips previously. And so I'd like to know what is happening in California in terms of growing co-op home care.
Well, I know that we have, as I shared, we have one that we're starting and is open right now, and very slowly open. We have 2 clients and 2 caregivers right now.
So you're growing it.
Yes. And then there is another one in Los Angeles, another home care co-op. Those are the only ones that I know about. I just want to comment that co-op home care is a win-win, really, for the client. One of the biggest challenges in home care is turnover. You know, if you are having somebody helping you in your home, you really want to have the same person there, and the turnover is horrendous. It's something like 80%. And it's less than half that in the home care industry. I also want to say it's an area that I was hesitant to enter because it is you can make more cleaning homes than you can being a caregiver, even in a co-op business. So we're hoping that we can change that, but it is traditionally, I mean, it's really hard because there's a cap on how much you can charge, people. So it is, it's going to be a challenge to increase the wages and make it a really, really worthwhile business. And we have some things in mind in the long term.
So what kinds of things are a cap on what caregivers can charge? I didn't.
Just the amount of money people are able to pay.
I see.
We're serving mostly private pay. We actually, public pay is just not in the cards. We won't be able to do public pay unless we can get it subsidized through a grant or donations or something like that. It's just the pay is too.
Could they be like a nonprofit co-op where you can get grants for this kind of work?
Well, that's our role, is that we do get grants to help with that kind of thing. And that's what we would do. You can't have a nonprofit worker co-op essentially, because it is developed for the members, not for the public.
Right. Okay, another question I have before I'm going to open up to everybody is, a few years ago, there was some legislation in California that enabled co-ops. I think made it easier for co-ops to form. And I don't really understand or remember all the parts of that. So I would like either one of you or both of you to chime in and tell us what happened in the California state legislature that now makes it easier for co-ops to form.
Kim, were you involved with developing and passing the
Well,
AB?
I was involved a little bit in part of that, but basically it didn't. I think the intention of the law was it is part of we already had a consumer cooperative statute that was about 20 years old. But there were parts of it that weren't the best fit with worker co-ops. And so the new legislation gave the option under that same bill to create a worker co-op. And Hilary, you can add more if you like.
Yeah. And this has been an interesting question for me, because in some, as you well know, Georgia, having traveled so much and led so many trips to other parts of the world where co-ops are much more prevalent than they are here, many people will argue that having a standard statute that makes it easier to just say, oh, okay, here's how I'm supposed to set up my worker co-op. So I described a minute ago that we work with a transition team where we figure out the design of the co-op. And that is a very in-depth process because you have so many choices. And what I love about that is that people really think it through, and then they know more how to live out their co-op structure. Because they've been through that process, but at the same time, it's not very scalable, as some people would say, or it's just more complex. So I think what AB 816 did that is helpful is it kind of established a clear setup in the law of, ways that worker co-ops that are worker co-op corporations in California can be set up. And you still have choices within it, but it's more narrow set of choices. And we've now used those statutes with, probably 6 or 8 companies, and it does make it easier. It makes it easier for the lawyers to do the legal work, and there's sample bylaws that some of our, partner organizations put together. So whether it's a game changer to have that statute, I don't know. But what I understand is that the way that it came about was that several organizations, we weren't involved, and that's why I asked Kim if she was, but the Sustainable Economies Law Center and some folks from the Arizmendi Association, as you probably know, were very involved in working on that over 2 legislative cycles, as I understand it. And I don't know the ins and outs of how they got it passed, but I do know that I have found it helpful. We found it helpful as co-op developers to have that law in place.
Great. Yeah, I remember when they were working on it, we had some of the people from the East Bay Law Center actually speaking about it. But at this point, I forget the details that I once knew. So what I'd like to do is open it up for questions, comments from anyone who's in our audience. Sometimes it takes a minute or 2 before people want to chime in. Okay, so I see Fran Corton. Would you like to ask?
Sure. So I'm interested in what either Kim or Hillary can tell us about trend lines. Are we getting more and more worker cooperatives, or is it stable and kind of like not much expansion, or is it even shrinking? And I'd be interested in your perspective on California. And if you have a broader perspective on the US, I'm interested in that too.
Sure. Yeah, I'll say a few words, and Kim probably has thoughts here too. I genuinely do believe that it's growing. And I know that in California, because we've just worked on this paper, it's called California Cooperatives, and we look at worker housing and childcare cooperatives. And we did a survey of California worker co-ops, and also just kind of worked with the US Federation of Worker Co-ops to kind of update, to be honest, sort of their records about who their membership was, because it wasn't all super current. And to just like check in, and does this thing still exist? Oh, this new one is coming on. And I called all the people that I knew who were working on new ones, and if they were ready to be included, I included them. And there are about 100 worker co-ops in California now. And the current estimates on national are about 600. So of course, it's a small number overall. We wish it were much more. And there's about 40,000 co-ops of all types in the United States. And there's about 7,000 ESOPs. So we have a long way to go. But I do know that probably about 10 years ago, I would say, I remember an estimate from Democracy at Work Institute was that there were about 250 worker co-ops in the US. So, certainly, our work, we're part of a collaborative of organizations that do worker co-op transitions. And I would guess that among that collaborative, I don't actually have the numbers at hand, but I'm going to guess that probably about 40 new worker co-ops have been created by the organizations in that collaborative over the last 5 years, maybe more than that. So there's still small numbers, but it is a trend up. And there's a lot of work now on how to make that trend increase, because we see much, much greater potential than where we're at now. So that's a, conversation we can maybe get into if we have time, but we could also be happy to have another time. What are your thoughts on that, Kim?
I think you're right. I think in all sectors of cooperatives, co-ops beget co-ops. So the more there are, the easier it is to form them, and the more people see it as an option, a lot of different things. I agree with you, Hillary.
I think this is one part that's really interesting and I'm looking for other people with questions, is that in 2008, when we had the economic meltdown, we had taken our first group to Mondragon, and we were there when all this news came out about, the Wall Street just kind of crashing. And some of us were saying, well, maybe we should just stay here, see if we can find a way to be part of the Mondragon cooperatives. So it's been very interesting to see what they've gone through since 2008, what businesses have gone through here, and what you both have pointed out about the resilience of the worker-owned businesses through the COVID pandemic, through the downturn, the economic downturn. I mean, it's quite extraordinary what worker-owned businesses are able to do. And I think one of the things you pointed out was, well, during the COVID, they had time to think up a new business within their business. And that's quite profound, because if they were just workers at a company, that wouldn't have happened. It's their role in the business that they take very seriously, being responsible owners as well as workers, that they use that time so productively. I think it's a good example of the difference between just having a job and being really invested in a worker-owned business. So somebody else, do we have people who want to ask or say things? You've just silenced them all. I have lots of notes. I could go into things. I'm very interested in this idea of a co-op for home care, because I think it's a really important, necessary area for co-ops. And I remember when we were in, well, many times when we were in Mondragon, they'll say, the first thing we look for, what is the need in the society? And that's what we want to create the business around, that need. And here I see that need being home care co-ops. I think there's a real need for that. I know it sounds complicated from what you just said, but I think it's worth looking at, because I think it's really needed. So it looks like Fran wants to ask something else.
You're
Fran?
muted. You're
Fran?
muted, friend.
I wouldn't take more than my share of time, but I don't see other hands up. So I'm really interested in the whole ESOP thing. I've talked with Marjorie Kelly. I'm sure you know her. And Marjorie's view seems to be that ESOPs are actually often better suited for the larger companies, and that when you get more than 30% of the employees having a share in the company, that the whole democracy side begins to shift. That if it's a little tiny amount, 5% or something, it makes zero difference. But her point is that as you get to a larger percent, over 30%, you begin to take on more the ownership culture dimensions that you talk about for worker ownership. So anyway, I'm just interested in your perspective and whether you see the ESOP as an important sector option as we really think about trying to spread worker ownership much more broadly.
And before you answer, I just want to tell people who may not know that an ESOP means employee
Stock ownership.
I don't know what the P stands for, but it's
Plan,
employee stock
yeah.
ownership program or plan.
Plan.
Okay, so I'll let you answer the question.
Mhm.
Sure. Yeah, Fran, we do at Project Equity, we do see it as a very important, the ESOP model is an important part of this. We talk a lot about a big tent. And as I said in my presentation, we are of the school of thought that it's important to promote the concept of broad-based employee ownership. And we also promote democratic employee ownership. But we really want to mainstream this. And I think if we limit the conversation to worker co-ops, we have much less chance of doing that. And certainly in our experience, it is true that companies that are, 50, 70 employees or more in the lower wage industries we work in, you can do an ESOP with a 5-person company if it's profitable enough, but we work in, lower margin industries. So if you have, 50 or more employees and you're a business owner, you're definitely going to look at an ESOP, because that's the one that, if anyone you're talking to, your lawyer, your CPA, your banker has heard anything about employee ownership, it will be an ESOP. It probably won't be a co-op. And they'll probably steer you away from both an ESOP and a co-op because they're not very familiar with them in most cases. But there are really significant tax benefits for ESOPs, for the selling owner in an ESOP situation. Some of those are available in a co-op transition as well. And it's more complex financially, but it is more of a turnkey operation, and you can choose to change if you want to, you can change governance over time. Whereas with a co-op, like all of that changes. So it's just it's a more mainstream model. It's more accessible to a lot of businesses. They're not accessible, but more appealing. So we think that it's important to promote the whole spectrum and to help business owners figure out what's a good fit for them. The one other thing I want to say is that if you do take a look at the paper I mentioned, the case for employee ownership, you'll see a bunch of data, and I shared a few data points, but the vast majority of that data is from ESOPs. So what we know about the wealth building potential of employee ownership is all based on ESOP companies, and it's very, very real. So there are some incredible, really rigorous studies that show dramatically more retirement savings and even higher pay, like 33% higher pay in one study compared to other, things in the industry. So you won't get the democracy, you won't get the, you might get a great culture. You won't always get a great culture, but to be honest, there's some worker co-ops that, spiral into dysfunction, don't always have great cultures, but overall worker co-ops do have great cultures. But a lot of other businesses have great cultures as well. So if we're serious about reducing the wealth gap, I really believe that ESOPs are an important part of the equation.
Did you want to say anything, Kim?
Thank you.
No, I mean, I agree. It's good to have a big tent where our focus is on cooperatives, and ESOPs are really, they're not, I mean, I think it's important to know they're not cooperatives unless they could be democratically governed. And then they get closer to being a co-op, but they're not.
I love what our closed captioning is doing with ESOPs. They're calling them ASOPs, like the morals, the Aesop fables. Right. So I see that Mike wants to ask a question. You want to unmute, Mike? There we go.
Yeah. This just popped into my mind, and it'll probably kind of show my ignorance with this whole concept, because I don't really know that much about it. But I mean, would for example, I mean, what are the chances or possibilities of companies that are already established and very successful, say very large companies, for a crazy example, you say like Amazon or something like that. I mean, that could never, is that like something that could never, ever happen in history, that a company like that would actually become, or maybe not that big, but I'm just saying, is that within the realm of possibility, or is that do you try to take companies that are already established and large and try to turn them into cooperatives? Or I'm just saying, just kind of throwing it out there because I don't really know that much about it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Kim, do you have anything to say about that? You want to jump in?
I think you're in a really good position to respond to that.
Is that a crazy question in general, or I don't know?
I mean, I think it's good to ask it. And there are people who are very passionate about that idea. So there have been, there's a bunch of folks thinking about how the users of tech companies could become the owners. I think the challenge there is the vast amount of capital and profit that is going to those capital holders in those companies and those investors. So to get them out would be very hard. But I do think, and that's another thing about the ESOP model, it can be done progressively. It can be done in very, very large companies, as I think, I can't remember who said it, maybe Georgia. It is done in some public companies, but usually at a very, very small scale. So yeah, I think it's very possible for, significantly large companies. And I can't think of examples beyond a few thousand employees, but I know there are ones significantly bigger than that have ESOPs as well. I will say that I didn't mention, I mentioned, but didn't describe the employee ownership trust model. And I don't know if any of you happen to have any Bosch appliances in your kitchen, BOSCH. Yeah. Okay. Lori. Good. So do I. Love my dishwasher. So Bosch is a company based, I think, in Germany, and it is owned by an employee-owned trust. And it's kind of like an ESOP in that the employees don't directly own the shares. There's a trust that owns the shares on behalf of the employees, but it's not an ESOP, and it's more flexible, and it gives you the ability to kind of be a bit more creative. And usually it's meant to keep the company owned by those employees through the trust for perpetuity, versus ESOPs can get sold. And, there's lots of coming and going of ESOPs actually in some cases. So that's a model where some very large, multinational corporations are actually owned by trusts, which is I think a positive ownership model as well.
How does that trust work? Where does do they get part of that proportion in their salary? Or is it retirement funds, or what is it?
I don't know. What I know is that it's quite a flexible model. I mean, I don't know anything really about Bosch or the ones that have been done in Europe. They're much more common over there.
Mhm.
But the ones I've known people who've worked on some small ones here in the US, and I think you could set it up anyway. I don't know if any of you are in the East Bay, but there's a wonderful company called Firebrand Breads.
What's it
Which,
called?
yeah, Firebrand Breads.
Oh,
I
yeah.
see Mike thumbs up. Yeah, it's right near the Impact Hub in Oakland. And they just in the past year, I believe, became partially owned, not fully owned, but I think majority or close to majority owned by an employee ownership trust. And they're doing some really interesting things. And I don't know exactly how it's moving forward, but they're a wonderful company that employs some folks with all kinds of barriers to employment, and is doing really great financial literacy and business literacy and other great things with their employees.
Great. I think Lori wants to ask something. Lori?
Yes, okay. So one of the things that I see today is that there's such a hard, or well, let's just say there's such great demand of local workers and for businesses. And they're saying, they're recruiting, they're trying to hire, but when polled, a lot of these people feel that they want to stay at home and not work in businesses any longer. When you're talking about having like an issue around recruiting, is it just the fact that maybe it needs to expand beyond just the industries that you currently have? Or do you see that as a future plus of what's happened through the pandemic? And either one could answer.
I think what she's referring to a lot here, we're seeing in Sonoma, it's like every business I go into, from the post office to a restaurant to no matter where I go, it's saying we're hiring. And everyone's looking for people to work and they're not applying. So that's, I think, what we're seeing a lot of. I don't know about you two.
I know that the co-op, the startup co-op home care is experiencing some difficulty with recruitment, and it probably has some of the same basic reasons as in Sonoma and in the community where I live, Davis. It's pay, it's the salaries are quite low. And in the case of a worker co-op, if you're a initial member, it's hard because there's not a big promise. You have to build the business. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult, and the lack of understanding about what that means to be an owner of a new startup. So I think those are some challenges. But I have thought, I read in our local paper the other day, just this huge list of these small businesses that we have lost in our community. And I think what an opportunity if people really want to start new businesses to work together, to start some new worker co-ops. It's a great model for small businesses, and the transitioning model that Hillary refers to as well. But it could be a way for us to recapture, as people have gotten so used to buying from Amazon and buying online, it's really scary. When to me, it's scary about what I think about the future. And I like my small businesses. I like to go out to eat in my community and get services locally and goods. But it's a challenge. And I think that co-ops could be an opportunity for local businesses.
What you're saying reminds me of the kinds of businesses that existed in the USSR, where you'd have one supermarket that was all over the country, and that was it. And you'd have one company that had clothes, and that was it. And we're seeing the same thing happen here out of capitalism. We're seeing corporate capitalism is becoming the same way state-controlled businesses were. So it's a very interesting and kind of bizarre reality. I mean, Amazon, all these companies are becoming like what we used to think of as state-owned, only they're corporate-owned, which is much worse. So because there aren't the guarantees and the help that I think people had, you know, in socialist countries. I'm going to go to Katie next, and then Ben, and that probably will be our end. But Katie, you're next.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, everybody. I really liked what you said too, Georgia, about the elder home business. Boy, that's a big boat to float. But anyway, I wanted to ask a generic question. I don't think is appropriate for both of you, but I do wonder generally, where are these unemployed people and how are they surviving? But back to the point of your presentation today, how do you get the word out and do it in a way that's inspiring and uplifting, so that whether it's the New York Times or whatever, so that you obviously have something profoundly important and pivotal here for the culture. How do you plan to get the word out? My other question is, have you heard of any in these situations where they have interpersonal conflict because they're co-owned and operated, et cetera? How do they work through those conflicts? Is there a procedure in place, or is it one at a time, doing the best they can?
Which of you wants to take that?
You know, I have some experience with that latter question, but I think Kim probably has a lot more. So maybe I could speak a little bit to the getting the word out and then hand it off to Kim to talk to one or both of the questions. So getting the word out is a lot of what Project Equity does. We do believe strongly that lack of awareness of co-ops and of employee ownership is a big barrier. It's not the only barrier, but it's I won't say solve, but it's the easiest one to address. And yet I will humbly say that my humble colleagues in both the worker co-op world, broader co-op world, and the ESOP world are too humble and not great at marketing. So I don't think the co-op movement or the ESOP movement, for that matter, have marketed themselves well. My co-founder at Project Equity does have a marketing background, and we've really prioritized that. So we do a lot of things. We do a lot of data studies, actually. I can put some more links in the chat, but we try to dramatize with real data and infographics, as well as stories, a lot of personal stories of what companies have gone through and what worker owners experience. So the raising awareness about the importance of local businesses and what we call the small business closure crisis, using those data studies, and the importance of older businesses in our communities. So we do a lot of that. We try to get press with that. In the past year, we've been doing a fair amount of advertising, actually, paid advertising for the first time. And that's been apparently pretty impactful. We've, increased our click-through rates, and we've gotten some companies calling us out of those paid advertisements. And then, Kim and I were just talking this morning about, we are planning a whole, outreach effort, hoping to place some good articles in publications, with our new paper about California cooperatives. So we're hoping to reach legislators as well as, philanthropy. We're really trying to engage the whole ecosystem. So it takes time, takes effort, but getting the word out is a really important part of what we're doing.
Maybe you can send an op-ed to the New York Times jointly on your project. That would be great.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
So Kim?
I think I know when I think about our nonprofit, we're operating basically on, not a real well padded budget, and we have our head in our project so much. And I get frustrated because I think I'll get to this, and I know my colleagues too. And we're, feet on the ground kind of development folks. And so sometimes the thing that gets dropped is the kind of marketing and that kind of thing, which is important. But in relative, when we're talking about relative to projects, relative to getting a co-op off the ground, we choose the co-op, getting the co-op off the ground. And in terms of the disagreements, this is what there is not a thing that people are involved in where there's not problems, So, when sometimes at staff meetings and so forth, we'll discuss a project where there's a difficulty, and we refer to it as the P factor. It's people. anytime we have people involved in things, we're persnickety, we have our own personalities and so forth. And so the key is to recognize that and to develop systems to dealing with it. And that's the way, you know, we do it in our family, we do it in all of our close relationships. It's no wonder that in our workplace, we would have the same thing. And they exist in every workplace, but in a worker co-op, they can work it out and they can choose how to work it out.
Yeah, like Mondragon, they said at Mondragon, in order to be part of a co-op, you have to be mature, which, you know, means you're going to listen to people. You're going to have a conversation. You're not going to be one-sided and pushy. So I think, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Ben next. Do you want to unmute?
Yeah, I'm outside as well and enjoying the waning warm days. But I wanted to just, you know, the speakers were talking about the Great Resignation, which is the number of people who have left jobs and are trying to, you know, circle around before they have to land back in the job market again. Because I think the people have had through the pandemic an experience of their mortality. And so many people have had the experience like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I selling all my time to these basically either soulless giant corporation or small business petty tyrant who, and, you know, a lot of this too, the consolidation of the number of businesses, I think it's inevitable. This is sort of the movement of capitalism as it goes, is toward greater concentration of wealth. And you saw this after 2008, where the hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of small businesses went under. The pandemic, I think, has really largely completed a lot of that purge. And there's a lot of these small businesses that were simply undercapitalized, that couldn't survive without low wages and these really bad benefits. So on some level, it might be a constructive destruction. But the reason people aren't going back is that there's a capital strike by the ownership class. They want you to come back to work, even though there's still the Delta variant out there, but they don't really want to substantially raise the wages or improve the working conditions.
Do we have a question going on here, Ben?
This is a class war going on. I'd like you to comment on that, how the working class is basically creating this tension with the ownership class.
Either of you want to say anything about that, or is it not really relevant to what you're doing?
Well, I think it's absolutely relevant. You know, and I think this whole thing about the Great Resignation is remarkable. I mean, it's mind blowing. It's, when you think about it, it's not entirely surprising, but I think the degree to which it has happened is really extraordinary. And I actually read a great article, I think it was yesterday, and I think it was a New York Times article about kind of what are the reasons for this. And the initial theories were it's because people are getting, I mean, many people were making more on their expanded unemployment benefits than they were in their crappy jobs. But that's not the reason, because the states that kept those benefits longer and the states that cut them off earlier didn't show any different trends in terms of the Great Resignation. So it really is a quality jobs crisis, I think. And there's probably other things as well, but, you know, people are leaving jobs that they dislike and where they're often mistreated or disrespected. And I hadn't seen this data before, but this article had a link to an academic study that looked at schedule variability and last minute scheduling and how workers have to, you know, as we all know, increasingly just show up whenever they're called. But the disparities of that across race are really well documented. So, you know, if you're Black, you're much more likely to not get your schedule in advance. And that was horrifying to me, but not surprising. So those inequities just continue and they keep increasing. So I do think that creating better jobs where people have true voice and agency is an antidote to a lot of what people are running away from. And worker co-ops are absolutely a way to do that. And we haven't mentioned the generational shift in terms of millennials as well, but we all are familiar with the general value set of millennials, and they do resonate really naturally with models like this. So as you can tell, I'm optimistic about the contribution that co-ops can make. I did want to say one other thing, which is that you may know that more and more of traditional work, even working for large corporations, is outsourced. I just learned this a couple of years ago, but the staffing industry, which used to be called the temp industry, is no longer a temp thing. So I think like 40% of oh, I can't remember which tech company it was, but maybe Facebook, like 40% of their regular workforce is hired through staffing companies. So that the model of employment has been changing for a long time. And it's not just about, the gig economy. It's also about that dynamic. And there are a couple of staffing cooperatives that have gotten going. One that will become very large, I believe, called Allied Up, with allied healthcare workers, has just started in January of this year. And it's a unionized co-op started by SEIU UHW, which is a 100,000 member union in California of healthcare workers. And it's it's people who may never meet each other on the job. And it's probably right now, I think it has, 50 or 100 initial workers, but it has the potential to grow to thousands or tens of thousands. So that's going to be a very different model of a worker cooperative. But I think it's important that innovation is happening as well, because it is following the trend. It's addressing one of those big trends.
You want to say anything, Kim? Or we go on? Okay. I have two more people who, pardon?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. I have two more people who want to ask a question, and I'm going to ask you to make them short because we're running out of time and we won't take any more after that. So I've got Linda and then Ned. Linda, would you like to go first?
Sure. This very, very quick question. I'm out at the beach, enjoying the outside too.
You're always at the beach.
I know. What can I say? So I went to business school. In fact, that's how I knew about Mondragon. I think I was one of your first trips.
You were.
But I didn't learn a lot in business school about cooperatives, although I had heard the name Mondragon, so I was all ears. Have you guys tried to get the word out to core faculty, especially faculty who are educating students on starting their own business, on entrepreneurials? I know I took an entrepreneurial class at Columbia, but I didn't hear anything about cooperatives from there.
Do you want to go first, Kim?
Well, I just want to say, I think I think at all levels, we should have a discussion of co-ops. I was really frustrated because about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, textbooks then were requiring to have a class in business. And I read my daughter's textbook, and it had an explanation of co-ops that was absolutely incomprehensible. And it was just this little tiny sidebar. No effort was put into writing it. It made no sense at all. And so I think what we need to do is really include all different kinds of, if we're going to require a course in business, and we need to cover all fairly business models. So, and there are some, definitely, and I think Hillary can probably share some more there.
Yeah, I'll just say that, Linda, I'm delighted to hear that you heard about Mondragon in business school, because part of our origin story at Project Equity is my co-founder says she went to UC Berkeley Business School, the Haas School of Business, I think 20 years ago now, and said she'd never heard of employee ownership or co-ops until she met me, which was, like 10 years later. So yes, it is a really important strategy. I agree with Kim at all levels of education. And if I had to choose one to start with, I think you see a little bit more of it in law schools. But there's little bits in business schools, and the UC San Diego has an institute that's focused on employee ownership, and their business school, but with a heavy ESOP focus. But we know those folks, and we're encouraging them to kind of broaden the tent. And I think we do need to see more about co-ops and business schools, and I think the field will be working on that.
Well, fortunately, several professors from universities have come on our Mondragon seminar trips, and we've had 10 of them so far. We'll have our 11th next year, May 15th to 21st, if anyone's interested in coming. I can't wait to go back. So I'm going to call on Ned now.
Thank you, Georgia. And thank you to our guests. You're so much heart and information and caring about this. So what strikes me, I'm working in the climate industry, you might say. How do we make changes around climate? And there's all this talk, and the unempowerment of people is so closely related to the destruction of the earth and all that. So we want to have this just transition. And everything I hear about worker co-ops tells me we need a new home care business. We got to retrofit all the homes to get off of fossil fuels. And we keep thinking there's going to be an awful lot of work in that, but it's technical. And I keep stumbling over, well, how do we start these businesses? Because there's so much business skill involved in a new thing. So I am thinking maybe we transition the older geezers like me, they're working as plumbers or whatever, and they're wearing out. But maybe we do this transition strategy, take over their companies and then kind of turn them and reinvent them with the new technologies and launch in a fresher direction. And the same with the heating companies. I just don't know where to get started. All I know is it sounds like just this fabulous idea. There might be a lot of work, but we've got to create these we have to train a lot of people well in technical skills and business skills. So I'm kind of at a loss about, it just seems like a great opportunity. I don't know how we're going to ignite it. Otherwise, people are just going to go in and take wage jobs with the lowest wage, and the same old mistreatment is going to occur.
Yeah.
So I just appreciate any ideas you've got on what we might do. It looks like a huge opportunity. So thank you. I'll be quiet.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say quickly, if you do know of businesses that you think maybe they haven't made that transition yet, but they could, or they're starting to make it, we're, like I said before, we're available to just do free, no obligation consultations with any business about their company and whether, employee ownership could potentially be a fit. And, my colleagues are skilled at no pressure and an educational approach and all that. So if you know of any companies, you can send them our way to start thinking about it. But yeah, it does feel a little bit like the challenge with advanced manufacturing. We talk a lot about the loss of manufacturing jobs and how we want to keep them because they're middle wage jobs. And a lot of those are companies with older workforces and older owners. So we do have a manufacturing initiative to help retain manufacturing companies. But the real challenge in manufacturing is that there are all these, the industry has become so much more technical. And even though there are training programs, they haven't been able to get enough workers through those programs to fill those jobs. So it's a huge opportunity, and that's where you need like the community colleges and all those other programs. You need the whole ecosystem to work together. And I hear you, Ned. It is daunting. I am encouraged by the growth of the solar industry, and there are a lot of co-ops in solar. There have been a number of them forming, as I think Kim mentioned. So maybe related industries could be inspired by the solar industry and the work of Amicus Solar Cooperative, which is a cooperative of independent solar companies. And some of those are worker cooperatives, and they're inspiring and educating each other.
I think an advantage of cooperatives is that the people who own them, the sole motivation is not to accrue capital and wealth. Otherwise, they probably start their own businesses and hire employees and so forth. And so I think that it affords a platform for people to really say, we really want to be environmentally green. We really want these kinds of things, and to be in the position to make them happen.
Great. Well, this has been really rich, and I'm so grateful to both of you for doing this program with us today, our Planetary Pause series, which began 18 months ago and will go on for the rest of the year. So I want to thank you both, and I want to thank the people who ask questions. Really thoughtful, really good, gives it a lot of energy to the whole program. And I just wanted to ask if either you, Kim, or Hillary have any last sentences you want to say before we end the recording.
I'll just say thank you. I so appreciate the discussion and the wonderful questions, and I'm inspired by all of your curiosity for learning and for understanding kind of the cutting edge opportunities and how we can all support them.
Great.
Yeah,
thank
I just want to say the same thing. Thank you very much. And just say that really, if we're talking about getting the word out, all of you here are can be catalysts for that. And the best things that you learn about are through family and friends. So share.
So well said.
So thank you so much again.